Welcome everyone to this week's Real Talk Food Safety with Jill and Tia. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are excited, and I can't believe this is the last week of August.
Right?
Isn't that
It's like
wild?
here we keep feeling like it's the end of summer, even though we're supposed to have 90s back in the 90s, like next week or something.
Yeah, we have a few more warm days to get through. I was reading about, I don't know. I guess we read about weather every day because it's so hot everywhere. But today I was reading and they were saying how like the hottest days on Earth has been this summer,
Oh, well,
and
and
we
yeah,
felt it.
we have. And look at the things that have been going on, like right, the hurricane that hit over by California on the West Coast, and now we've got stuff coming up in the East Coast and through the Gulf. Like,
Yeah.
woo, there's some crazy stuff happening.
There really is. There really is. So weather is always top of mind.
It is, for sure.
But we're hoping to have some nice, beautiful days coming up that we can continue to enjoy outside until it gets super, super cold.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, and we're super happy to have everybody here. So, as you're joining us, we would love to know because today's show is all about top down or bottom up when it
Mhm.
comes to culture. So, let us know in the chat, does culture start from the top or is it driven from the bottom? What do you think?
Mm, mm. This is an age-old question, I feel like, right? Like it's something that we've talked about for many, many years in industry on how should we be driving culture, right?
Mhm.
Where should it start? Where should you start as an organization? Should it start from the top or the bottom? So we're curious what you all are thinking about out there.
Yeah, and we know there's a lot of messaging out there around, especially food safety culture, that it has to start from the top. And
Chelsea, Annie,
yeah.
top down.
Ooh, top down. Yeah. And if you've listened to us for a minute, you know that I am in the camp of I don't think so.
Hmm.
I am very skeptical because I always say if we keep thinking that the top is going to be the driver, and that might be our definition of top, but I think when people say top CEO, top the president, they all have to drive it. And I'm like, we've been waiting for them to drive investing in food safety, making food safety a priority, making people in food safety a priority. Do you all feel like it's happened? I would say from our conversations with people in industry, the answer is very little.
Very, very
Very
little.
few times have we had a president or a CEO, unless we've been involved in a massive recall or something, driving it.
Driving it. Yeah, we have a few more. Kevin said top.
Top.
Marita
See,
said top.
I'm in like definitely in the small like proportion here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting when you said, I can't even remember where we were. Maybe we were at a conference and you said like the top isn't just going to wake up and get it
No,
in
they're
the
not gonna be like,
in the
oh,
near
out of all the
future, right?
business concerns we have, food safety, we're driving you today.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's so we have to do things in the meantime. When I think about culture, top down, bottom up. There's someone I can't remember who I was talking to. I want to say I was talking to Ben Miller at Tag, and he said he was talking. We were talking about something else, but it kind of came up like driving from the top. And he said, well, it's driving from the top, right? It's definitely easier. So if you have that top support, like that's definitely easier when the top is like, yep, we have the funds, we're gonna put the funds towards it, it's priority, it's built into all the processes that we have. Like that's definitely easier. But if we're not on the easy path, right, which most of us are not on the easy path of that, does that mean we wait?
Mhm.
Or does that mean others have to get involved to start sparking some culture change?
Yeah. And that's why we're going to talk about it today. Because I think there's definitely like top leadership, I would say, in food safety and quality need to be the ones driving what this looks like. And they need to be advocating up to make sure that there are funding and resources and support and time and capacity. But it also has to be really understanding what is it that our other team members need.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we've also seen initiatives and campaigns that start and we're like, yeah, that's not going to get us there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, good idea, but not quite there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with culture, because we know people are so hesitant of the flavor of the week or the campaign of the year, like, how do we really position it and have the support, which does need to be supported from the top, very top, so that we can really have the long-term results that we want?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things too, like as we think about like top leadership, it's something that you said that made me think about this, where sometimes if you haven't worked, like think about, we've worked in facilities, right? The longer you're away from the facility, the more you're disconnected on like what's happening in the facility and how's the facility culture changing and who's the new leadership, right? And how they're leading. And so as we think about like top leadership sort of trying to drive culture in a way where they're trying to say like, this is what you should focus on in each of the facilities, right? And this is how we're going to do stuff from the top down. Many times, and middle managers, we feel this. Many times it's coming down and then the bottom up is saying, no, it doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work that way. It's not going to happen. Like it, these are all the barriers that are there. And sometimes the top might be a little bit disconnected, as they should be, right? Because that's really what their role is, to do something else,
They don't
right?
need their fingers in all the details.
Right.
That's why they have people.
We don't want them. We don't want them in the details down here. But that also means that them alone cannot be the only ones starting with culture or driving culture.
Yeah. But that's why we're going to talk about all of that and more today. And also some of the, like, where do we need some of that support from the top, but where do we also need from the bottom? And what are some of the challenges that go along with each of them? So we'd love if, as you're listening, like, share what you've experienced. Like, what's been critical about top down, or who is the top? Like you all said, top down. Who's that top person that you're like, they're the driver?
You know what? That's actually a really good question. I'm curious from you all listening, like, who do you consider the top? Do you consider it to be the CEO? Do you consider it to be the head of food safety and quality, wherever that is for your organization? Because some organizations, the head is a director, right? Or the head, might be a manager if you're a one site operation. It could be the food safety and quality manager that reports up into legal or operations or whoever, right? They're reporting into. So I'm curious, like, even as you all say top down, who would you consider the top?
Sorry, I'm trying to talk, but I was muted.
Okay.
These are real problems working from home. My kids go back to school next week, but they decided now, while I'm on live and they know we're doing this live, they decided to vacuum upstairs. I appreciate our hygiene plan, but I'd love for us to just work on timing. So anyway, you might hear a little bit of noise in the background, but I'm not going to stop progress. So.
Right. That's awesome. I love that.
All right. So that's a little sidetrack from the show. But, if it is your first time joining us, Tia and I, we are here to help transform how people lead in food, because we want everybody to be empowered to live authentically, bring your whole self to work, and allow others. We want you to achieve more. And we are here to enable business growth. That is why our companies hire us, because they look to us to be those experts to help move us forward.
Yeah, because really food safety and quality, like, that's what we should do. We should be driving business results. And if we're not, then we need that seat at the table, right? We need to be integrated into the way work gets done. We need to become that trusted business partner. And like Jill was saying, that's what we do. We help our clients shift and mold and think about food safety and quality differently so that they are trusted business partners in the organization. So that's what we do. And that's why we're here talking real talk, because we know these are real issues that are happening right out into the industry and big topics. And so we create this space every Wednesday talking about those top issues, discussing, right, learning from one another.
Yes. And that's why today we're going to talk about top down and bottom up.
Yes,
So,
yes. Abby, thank you for the note. In your small business of about 30 employees, the top will be the CEO. Makes sense.
yeah. Well, and I think that brings up a good point. Sometimes when we talk about top leadership, it also depends on the size of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Because that can look a little bit differently depending on sizes of teams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which
Mhm.
I want to kind of just take a little asterisk and say that really all plans around, like, it should make you think about how big can I get my circle of influence where I am, right?
Mhm.
Because in a small organization, right, the CEO might be in your circle of influence,
Mhm.
right, and in that circle of control of where you can impact culture, right, your culture around you, right.
Mhm.
In a large organization, they may or may not be in your circle depending on where you sit in the organization. So
Yeah.
there's also something to think about as we have this conversation.
Yeah, and as we get started, so when we talk about top-down approach to management, it's really kind of this like company-wide decisions are made solely by leadership at the top. That's what top-down means, like solely by the leadership up here. While bottom up really is about how do we give teams a voice in these types of decisions.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, these kind of represent these bookends of the spectrum when the reality is that a lot of companies probably fall somewhere in between. And it may even depend on topic, on subject, situation,
Mhm.
environment. I mean, there's a whole
Risk.
lot of different things.
Right, exactly.
But I think that the important part is just the traditional organizational models are top down.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yep.
we see lots of those elements that still exist in almost all companies.
Mhm. Yep. And that's a good grounding to say too on, like, those are bookends, right? And we live somewhere in the middle. Um and also to think about, like, at what point do you need to shift to one side or the other, right? Like, you talked about a few of those examples, and it could be anything. It could be company. It's really company specific,
Mhm.
right? Like, you might have had a major recall, right, and it ends up being that the top needs to make this decision on this type of problem, right? And it's because you consider that to be a risk for your organization.
Mhm.
Maybe that's the right decision. I don't know. It depends, right? But that organization has kind of shifted to top down for that moment because of the risk or because of their current situation. So we can really live sort of in this space to get work done.
Mhm. But that also, I think, points out why, of course. So, right, things that we talk about in our leadership programs is really having clarity on expectations and authority
Mm-hmm.
because we often run into situations where we believe we have more authority than perhaps we actually have, or we're supposed to. Like people are looking for us to be these decision makers and have authority when maybe we don't always take it.
Yeah.
And those put us in some unique situations where then we kind of feel this gray zone. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why when we talk about top down and bottom up, it's really important to understand kind of like where those things fall in
Yeah.
different situations.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
So let's start by talking about the most popular one according to the topic, top down.
Yeah.
And what's the pros and cons of that, or
Mhm.
even the characteristics of a top down? So you even said it earlier, right? It's when the top, whether it's the CEO of the organization or the C-suite or the directors in the C-suite, whoever happens to be, they're the people that are typically making the company-wide decisions
Mhm.
for everyone, and they roll it out, right? They roll out, this is what we're doing, and everyone is supposed to get in line with it.
Yeah. And I think we're going to talk about kind of the things that it's made of and then later talk about some of the pros and like the flip sides of these, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm like, we could talk on this one probably the whole show. But
That's
kind of
true, right? That's true.
right.
Very
So
Very
which
true.
there does need to be vision, and that's also why there are leaders. Leaders are supposed to be those people, right, that we're going to follow because they have the here's where we can be together. Here's where we can go.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone needs to own that vision, right?
Someone.
Someone needs to own where we're going and
Mhm.
what path we're going down. And, if you ask 10 people what their visions are of the organization, it's probably going to be 10 different versions, right, of it. we really need one vision that we can all get around, because that's really when you start to talk about, right, your goals, right, and your priorities. It has to be, this is a priority because this is the vision and the mission of the organization and where we're going. And it's important that that is said, and that is sort of like the North Star of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Which means that all that alignment really comes from the top down. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes back to that, because it's handed down, that sometimes it feels command and control. That here's the vision and the goals, and you all just need to execute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things, like, even as we talk about, like, where should we fall somewhere in the middle, right? Like, at what point is it like, okay, this is the vision, this is where we're going, to like, how do we get there? Right. And when should it be top down, that someone is owning that vision, and at what point should it start to swing? Because I'm with you, Jill. I'm definitely in the camp of culture is definitely driven, I believe, mainly by middle managers. Yes. So that's where I also live there. I didn't say it in the beginning, but I live in that space of, I think culture is driven by, or even destroyed by, middle managers.
And I think and I think we're going to come to more of that, because I think that's definitely where this kind of comes from, because I think some of the challenges that we're going to see with top down is, even if someone has the North vision, if you've got no one behind you following, you're not a leader.
Right.
And so I think there has to also be this awareness that I can have a vision of how do we get better, but like, you've got to get people involved. And that's part of why top down doesn't work.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion, because if I just have one person who doesn't see all the different perspectives or gather all the different perspectives, how will I ever know where we're truly at to be able to move forward?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one point of like why top down, I think, continues to be popular, is that really that centralized decision making. In theory, people think that things can happen quicker.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if just the top's making the decisions, right, and we're aligning because we're a small group of people compared to the 30 people, you know, that's behind us, we can just get together, we can make the decisions, and then we can roll it out. It seems like it will be a lot quicker to get to the goals.
It could be, but then, you know, the flip side of that is then we often have bottlenecks. If we only have a couple people that can make decisions, then people are kind of left hanging if those people maybe aren't there, or you know, perhaps it's a timing thing, or they need more information, or maybe there's not capacity. So then everybody has to slow down because there are no decisions to be made.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were talking about, like the power, the authority, the permission, right? Like, if the only people making decisions are at the top, that means I have to stop when there's a decision point. And I need to talk with someone. Right. I need to talk with someone that is a decision maker. And we know that is like there anyway, right? In many, many areas where we do need to stop, and we need to align, and we need to talk. But can you imagine that happening each time you want to make a decision and you have to go to decision makers to do it? Like, I probably would have been like, why am I here?
Well, but I also think that this also really illustrates the difference between managers and leaders. When I'm a manager, I am in this spot where I'm also making decisions and doing the work. Where if I'm a leader, part of being a leader in my mind is that we have everybody make decisions about their own work. And as a leader, I need to be able to ask the right questions to help them uncover challenges, pitfalls, bottlenecks, what goes well, who's going to, you know, who's going to be in the way, all of those things.
Yes. I agree with that. Especially as you think about like what's in their area, right? Like what are we saying that you, as a person that's hired here at the organization, where is your area of responsibility? And then how do you completely own that part of the organization? Right. Otherwise, like 2 or 3 people are trying to do that job because there's no clear owner.
Yes. And that's one of the biggest problems with top-down leadership is then, like, the people who are doing the work, they don't feel very connected or engaged because they often aren't included and they are not heard.
Yeah.
And we all know that people really, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, and we want to, have purpose. So if we're not being able to feel those things and be undervalued, that just results in, lack of engagement, which is just money out the door, or turnover.
Yeah.
Money out the door.
I didn't look this up before we jumped on. Maybe I should, but there's like this, I can't remember where it came from, but we kind of talked about how like top leaders, their responsibility is to provide resources for the organization. Middle managers is really there to help drive that culture for the organization, because they're in this very unique, stressful spot, right? Where they are working strategy and they also have some execution, right? So they can really influence going up, and they can influence going to the front line or of the organization. And then the people that might not be in the middle manager piece, their role is about execution. How do they continue to execute, right? It might be day-to-day execution, or, getting cases out the door. It might be continuous improvement and closing gaps, but they're really around the executional part. And so that's how I think about it, where it's like each piece is very important to culture and getting work done and all of those things. It's just when top leadership, and really honestly when everyone tries to play in a role that is really not serving where they are, right, and doesn't really take into account like where really your area of responsibility and ownership lies, I think that's when we start seeing things like, oh, my voice wasn't heard, even though this is impacting my work.
Yeah. Well, and even if we use something besides food safety culture, let's think of something more tangible. Let's say sanitation. Like top leaders often don't know, and I hope, unless they've done sanitation, they probably don't know the details of what's all included. They think, oh, you just need to clean. We all know there's way more to sanitation and the details around that. So that's why what we need middle managers to be able to do, or this is my belief, like they need to be able to capture voices of people doing the work on what's going well, what's not going well, what resources do we need, and to be able to synthesize that, to be able to get that top leader support, to say, we need more, we need time, we need money, we need something better to be more efficient, and we need you to support that, and then come back and help people do that work.
Yes.
And so when we think about food safety culture, that's why I'm very much like, I don't think we can wait for top down just to magically say, ooh, I need to support it.
Yeah.
Our middle managers really have to be the ones to voice that and share why it's important and why it's how it enables the business to grow and be more successful when it comes to risk mitigation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And part of that's the leadership presence. Right. So it doesn't matter where you fall in the organization, there is an amount of leadership presence, which we talked about last week, that helps us show up in these spaces to be able to lead and to be able to message around the things that are important for us and for our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that leadership, like exactly what you're saying, for middle managers, it's important to have that leadership presence, right? And start working on that leadership presence, because truly we believe that you're the one that's driving that food safety culture, and waiting for others to do it is only going to mean more work, more burnt out, more, frustration, because top leadership is still not getting it. Right.
Yeah. And so you may actually have to be the one to help rally kind of the grassroots, bottom up type support, right?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about bottom up.
Yeah.
Grassroots. And what does that entail?
Well, really, I love to think of it as crowdsourcing, right? Because it's the voices of many across different levels that are really helping say, here's where we want change, and we want to be part of that change.
Yeah. Yes. It's acknowledging that, right? It's acknowledging that everyone wants to be a part of what impacts them, right? They want to, I think people want to have autonomy, and they want to make decisions for themselves. And when we think about bottom up leadership, it takes that into account.
It does. And what I love about it is, this is that part where middle managers, we, as you can tell, we really rely heavily on middle managers, and they just don't get all the resources and all the kudos that they need. But
True.
that's right. If we have all these voices, that's where someone needs to help kind of like massage out, like, what is the thing that we really want? What is it that we really need? Otherwise, we will have too many things going in one direction. So gathering voices and helping people collectively come to, this is the North Star that's important to us.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think a lot of times people shy away from bottom up leadership because it's like, oh yeah, you do get all of these voices, but we get all of these voices, what do we do with it? How do we comb through it? How do we know what's real and what's not? And it's one of the reasons why we do focus on middle managers, is because if your middle managers are set up for success, they can crowdsource their team, right? They should be in tune with their teams to understand what's working, what's not working, what resources do you need, what barriers are in the way, right? Like how are you celebrating? What's doing well? What are the gaps on your team? Making sure that those middle managers have the time to get to know their team and lead their team versus doing executional work, having the leadership skills, right, to back that up. That's where you can really crowdsource, and your managers really understand and have a really great pulse on what's happening. Mm-hmm. And then they can really help guide those conversations around, okay, where do we need to go with culture, and what type of resources do we need to deploy over the next year, 3 years, whatever, that you're looking at. But you have to set your organization up for success to be able to crowdsource those thoughts.
Yes. And I think, we always go back to the McKinsey, I can't remember the name, the one about the state of how
inside employees' minds.
Yes. And we know things are changing. It's part of it's generationally, part of it's just some of our outlook. Wow. Like the days of just tell me what to do, the group that subscribes to that type of philosophy is getting less and less.
Yes.
And so how do we, this area where people are like, I always go back to Oprah. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Does what I say matter? Mm-hmm. That is a really big group in our workforces right now. And so if we want to keep them engaged and retain people who have all of this talent and these gifts, we have to start opening that up in a new way for them to have their voice heard and to help develop them and make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking to someone yesterday, and they were saying they have been at their organization for about 9 or 10 months. And when they started, they were like, I'm not really quite sure about the culture of the organization. Mm-hmm. And so now talking to them, they're like, I'm starting to figure it out. But they had gone through this time. They explained that they went through this time where they said, you know what, I'm going to sit back. I'm not going to give my opinion, because they felt like they weren't being listened to. So they said they're going to sit back. I'm just going to do my work was the word. I'm just going to do my work. Whatever you tell me to do, that's what I'll do. And then they said, but I couldn't keep doing that because that's not who I am. Yeah. Like I have to step forward, right? I have to step forward. I have to, add what I think is right. I have to be a part of those conversations. And so to listen to this person that's really in this middle manager space and hear them say, I tried to kind of sit back and let the things come to me, from top leadership. But then it's like, no, I can't do that anymore. I have to speak up. I have to say something. I have to be a part of those conversations. Otherwise, I don't feel fulfilled as an individual. And so when you say the words retain and engage, that's exactly what it is. That person disengaged, mm-hmm. right? Because they felt like decisions were being made and they weren't being heard. And then now they're like, I can't continue to live in this space. So if it doesn't work out, right, that they're putting in their ideas and the organization continues to reject, then they're just going to lose that talent.
Yeah, they will. And, that's one of those challenges as organizations are evolving and kind of migrating to support a new style of working. Yeah. That, is something that some are taking into consideration, probably more than others, just because some of these things are so institutionalized. But really it's that whole, like, as we move from maybe more frontline to middle managers, sometimes, we still want to get all the things done.
Yeah.
But we really have to think about taking care of our team, and
Yeah.
getting their voice is our primary purpose.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
but I think the other, benefit of bottom up is we get to hear more voices. We
Mm-hmm.
get to hear more perspectives. And
Yeah.
sometimes, I think, Tia, you mentioned earlier, sometimes that can be overwhelming because there's so many voices.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the things, right? How often have you gone to the floor because people are telling you, like, this is what's happening? You go to the floor and you're like, all right, operator, tell me what you're seeing. And you hear something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is the value that when we talk about bottom up and grassroots that it brings. You get to hear from
Mm-hmm.
people who are like, no, this is what I'm actually seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we need that if we want them to be able to buy into where we're going
Yeah.
and be part of making where we're going.
Mm-hmm. It's important for that buy-in, and it's important for the results at the end. If we don't have that input and we're not actually removing the barriers, right, or solving the problems, and we're trying to solve some other problem over here, then we're not going to see the results that we think that we're going to see.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about it. That's such a great example, Jill, of like going to the floor and asking people like what is really going on. Because think about times that you didn't do that. And you, meaning audience, us, right? Like thinking about times that you did not do that step of actually asking, am I solving the right problem? You spin your wheels around and the things continue to happen, right? You're not actually solving what you think that you're solving, because the gap that you're looking at is not really a gap. It's not really the gap for that problem. And sometimes you won't know that unless you ask people.
Yeah, and it's in a different way. And I think with bottom up, that's one of the challenges is we've all been taught like to keep going and we just do the checklist and the status updates. But really it requires us to take a step back from that day-to-day type work and create deeper, more kind of personalized meaning for our team members. And it's about asking, like even our top leaders should be coming to middle managers saying,
Yeah.
how's your team's energy level? How's their attitude? What are some of the challenges? Like we have to ask different questions. And the way we do that sometimes is from bottom up. It can
Mm-hmm.
be top down as well, but it requires a different set of human skills to connect, motivate, and inspire others
Yeah.
that
Yes.
we haven't often been maybe championed or advocated to do because of being in technical roles.
Yes. Absolutely. It's so true. I mean, it's the reason why we created boot camp, right? It's really around what human skills do you need in order to really step into this leadership role to drive culture, right? And so that takes very different skills that we weren't taught, right?
No.
We just weren't taught those skills.
No. And no matter how, no matter the level of integrity, ethics, kindness, niceness, organizedness type things we bring,
Yeah.
still not always the right skills for being a leader and getting the most out of all of our team members.
Right. Exactly.
And that,
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, and that can be hard too,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes when we're asking all of our team members, to participate, and if we talked about that authority and decision making isn't defined well, that can actually be really confusing for people.
Yeah.
And so when we think about bottoms up, there still needs to be some structure in how we do that so that people know what to expect. And how do I operate in this system of bottom up versus top down?
Right, exactly. Because it could be completely new. And I love it that you brought up that structure, because that is important. And that is the role of the leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even thinking about like top leadership, right? What is the format? What is the structure that the organization is going to use as they crowdsource, right?
Mm-hmm.
As they get this information so that they can take the data, right? Analyze it and determine, next steps based on what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And so that structure is important, because you want to make sure that you're speaking all the same language.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
Really, I think too, one thing that I thought about that people could be asking is like, like when you talk about bottom up, like this sounds great, but when am I going to have the time to do this? And it makes me think about boot camp. And one of the reasons why we have workload capacity in there
Oh, absolutely.
is because as a leader, like you have to have a pulse on your team, and that takes time. And so when our to-do lists or tasks and are being like, we're being buried by those things, then we neglect people, we neglect our team, and so we lose that pulse on our team, where we don't know where we are, and we don't know where we're going. And so it's important, like workload capacity, like that is like one of the biggest things. And honestly, I didn't do anything like this until I was overworked, burnt out, frustrated at my job, and did my workload capacity. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, like, no wonder I feel this way, because I'm working a crazy amount of hours and I still feel like I'm not tackling the things that I feel like are priority, and like just being able to see it and write it down. And so like, even as you're thinking about, okay, how can I be a stronger leader here and really understand my organization and my team so that I can start influencing from the bottom up, a piece of that is really understanding your workload. Right. And understanding, where can I make time to prioritize people, and how can I have conversations with my manager on how I need to prioritize people to do my role, right? To do my role as a leader, as a manager, and to help drive culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, it doesn't mean like we're going to like 180, like the work that you do, because we know that the work that we do is so important. It can't just fall off the radar, right. But yet it's this transition. And I think that also goes into sometimes with, I'm going to say kind of the bottom up leadership, or bottom up grassroots. One thing that happens that that we've seen this before, where people are like, well, I'm just going to let everybody down here make decisions. But we also have to support them, because if they haven't done that work before, like everybody still needs some guidance, support, and development. And so one of the challenges with grassroots, if we're like, you all just go figure it out, like that's not the best approach when it comes to grassroots at all. Right. Because that can leave people frustrated too.
Frustrated, going in different directions, no common North Star, right? That's when you show up and you're like, wow, you have 5 teams in an organization, all 5 are doing things very different.
And then it's completely inefficient as well, because we have people doing the same thing. So, there's definitely some pros and cons with both approaches.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm curious, as we kind of walked through top down, bottom down leadership, a few of you all said top down for sure. I'm curious, what are your thoughts now on top down, bottom up? We didn't actually give you a middle.
No, but middle would be a good option, wouldn't it?
But we're curious, what are your thoughts now, as we've talked about some different aspects of each, on who should be driving food safety culture? I'm curious, your thoughts around it. So add it to the comments. We would love to see it.
Yeah, or what that looks like, and maybe even like what's coming up for you as we go through this.
Yeah.
Because that is the question. Like, what is the best approach for culture?
Yeah. The way that we like to think about culture is that culture is community. It's people. And when your organization is in a spot where only a few are making decisions, having the authority, a few having the permission, right? It's really hard to create that community.
Yeah, it is. And I think part of that is just some of that's the historical challenge. It's building trust across the organization. But in command and control, that wasn't always, like, you were just supposed to have blind trust. And there is some of that lack of trust. And there's often a gap between, and this is in studies too. I mean, there are published data on here that show like what top leaders think is happening is very different than what people frontline or even middle managers see what's happening. And so when we say top leaders need to drive everything, I think the part that we have to think about with community is, how does everybody's voice get up here so that there's more meaning, more accuracy, more purpose, more involvement.
Yes. Yeah. I think it goes back to what roles are we each playing? Like, where is my area of ownership? And where do I have that permission and that authority? Right. And at what point do I need to get other people involved? So being clear about those things helps with bottom up leadership and helps with that community, right? Because each of us play a part, just like in a community, each of us play a part in the community. And if we're not playing that part, something is off, right? Whether we step out or we're trying to be in other areas or whatever it happens to be, then the flow kind of gets off a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, historically, companies that have been very highly regulated tend to have top-down models.
Yes.
Because of those regulations. And that can make it really challenging to think about, like, how do you get more involvement bottom up? And in all transparency, it takes work to navigate what that looks like, but it doesn't mean that it can't be done.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's hard for those companies to break out of a sole top down, or at least some elements of that.
Right, exactly. And then, like, I think it goes back to even the example we talked about earlier, where if something major even happens, right, it's one of the areas in food, like the ones that are highly regulated, it's because things have happened, right, in the past. And so when things happen, then that's when leadership really grabs a hold on it, versus, it's the easiest thing, right, to say, you know what, I'll just take it on, so that I'll know that it's done right? I know what the pieces are and all of those things, versus empowering your people, right, to make those decisions, to make the right decisions, so those issues don't happen again.
Yeah. And Chelsea, I think, I love that you added a comment that you think it's top down and that Frontline should definitely be engaged. Absolutely. And understand the decisions made at the top. But there also, you say, has to be a relationship and trust between top leaders and Frontline and middle managers too, getting that inspiration and purpose from top leaders. And I would even say, I think sometimes we have to inspire, as middle managers, we have to inspire our top leaders. I think that goes to some of the influence that we talk about a lot in boot camp, where no matter how much data we share to say, hey, we have risk here, or this investment will get us this return, like, we still have to inspire top leadership to really commit the resources and support to what our teams need.
Yeah. When you look at organizations and they consider everyone in the organization to be a leader, and it's not just from like a talk standpoint, but it's clear that they expect you to be a leader because we hired you, and we hired you to be a leader in this organization. When you look at organizations that are like that, that means they've given those leaders, right, the right authority, the right ownership, the clear direction, right, on what leader means in that role. You see this major impact on culture, positive impact on culture, because each person truly believes that it's their responsibility to inspire the organization, right? Not just their team, but people, their coworkers, their peers, as well as their top leadership. It's my job as a leader, right? And like you said, we talk about it with influence and how inspiration is the number one way to influence. And as a leader, it's my job to influence. And so I have to learn those traits, right? I have to develop myself to be able to inspire really each part of the organization, because I am a leader. I'm a leader there. Yeah. And so you see that difference in organizations that actually put that value on people and develop them, right? Not just call them a leader and it's like, well, they don't, they're not helping them develop those leader skills, right? Those leadership skills, but the ones that actually put, the resources towards that and develop their leaders, you see a very different leadership style, and you see a very different culture in those organizations.
Yeah. I'd love to go always back to Peter Block. He's written a fantastic book called Community. And it was written really about communities. Like, if we think about work as the community that we live in, right? Like, we know that there are leaders in the community, but it also takes community members to say, I am going to have a responsibility in how my community looks, in our reputation, in what we do, and how we act. And I think that is the power of bottom up. It requires this community building, and that requires us to think about psychological safety and our shared purpose. But it also requires everybody to be willing to carry that responsibility.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Everyone willing to carry that responsibility. I think Chelsea also said something in here that stands out is the relationship and that trust. And if you are in an organization that right now does not have that trust between top leaders and the rest of the organization, whether that's the front line or the middle managers don't trust top leaders, it is top leaders' responsibility to start building that trust, right? And to start creating those safe spaces so that they can start building a culture, right, that is like this bottom up leadership culture that we're talking about. But that just doesn't happen overnight. It's not a, hey, we've been operating in this way where we didn't trust the frontline workers, right, to do their job because we need to be a part of everything. But now we are. Now we're going to trust you to go out and make mistakes and do your job, right, and like make those decisions. A lot of times people are going to be like, I think there's a catch, right? Like there's a catch to what you're saying. I really don't trust what you're putting out here. Even though you say, you want me to make decisions, you really don't. And so like that trust has to be built first and foremost. And we tell people all the time, like it takes time to build trust. And depending on where you are, we use a trust model. And if you've been in our boot camp, you've definitely seen it. Depending on where you are on the trust model will determine when are you going to make it right to the top of that ladder. And that could take years to do. But that is the first step. If you don't have that trust or that psychological safety, like it's hard to set up a bottom up culture because people don't feel comfortable sharing, or they don't feel like they really actually have the authority and right. That list kind of goes on and on.
Yeah. And not even it would be hard to have culture at all because if people don't have psychological safety and trust, like
well, probably
it's like a house of cards.
Right. Exactly.
And I also want to stress middle managers do not get enough credit for the spots that they are in and the work that they do. Yes. I think we often talk about top leaders and then frontline, where the meaning with frontline is literally I'm on the front lines, but the group in the middle is big and the most important part.
Yeah.
And what, I think when we talk about building food safety culture, if we have top leapfrogging over them to get in with frontline, like they're just chopping the middle manager's legs off. And they can't be effective. They can't be resources. They can't be supportive. And so there has to be this process in place where everybody gets to play a part. Yeah. I think it's super important to keep those things in mind because people do their best work when they get to source from their own power. Yeah. And that unfortunately doesn't often come from a top-down management style of command and control.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're not sourcing right from their own.
Yeah, power. They're just saying you do this, whether you are good at it or not, whether it fills you up, whether it creates purpose for you, nothing. I don't care. You go do that.
Yeah. And that's like, I kind of want to be like, and that's why coaching works, right? Is because coaching is all about sourcing from within, sourcing from your own power, right? To accomplish your goals or whatever it is you're trying to tackle in your life. And it works because that's the way people work, right? Like really coaching is just like, how do people think, right? Like, what are you telling yourself, right? Like, how are you sourcing from it? Like, it's really taking into account human behavior. Yeah. And that's why it works and why even as leaders, especially technical leaders, when you don't get any of this, right, in school, and nor are we rewarded for these things early on in our careers because we're in technical roles. And so we're actually rewarded for data and rational persuasion, right? And thinking logically in processes. That's what we're rewarded for. So when we're kind of quote unquote thrown into these areas of management and leadership, and then all of a sudden we have to start thinking about people in a different way that we have no information on, that's difficult to do. And so it's like making sure that your middle managers get those skills so that you can have an organization that also incorporates all people, not just people at the top.
Yeah, that's why I love seeing companies that are like adopting the coaching cultures and like these true coaching cultures where it's really about how do we bring the best out in others.
Yeah.
And it's a little more in depth than like when I started 20 years ago. I think that was kind of like, well, of course we want to bring out the best in others, but there wasn't a lot of intentional action behind it. It was really business need driven. And so really shifting to this place where recognizing like, hey, what the best in you may not always be like something that we have a place for in the organization, but like, how do I still bring that out so that you get to do what lights you up?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that's a really important part of when we think about culture is about it's about embracing people. And yes, we want it to fit into the company mission, but if it doesn't, like how do we help enable people to say, yep, this enables or like this still lights me up enough that I can contribute and engage here at work? Or maybe there's another spot, maybe there's another job or somewhere else that helps me do that. And when we help people actually even recognize that, that's in itself huge.
Yes. I've actually done that for one of my middle managers where
Yeah.
they really weren't a great fit for the organization. But instead of saying you're not a great fit, bye, right? It's really around what do you want to do? What lights you up? Like, because there could have been a spot, maybe we just didn't see it, right? But after talking with them and understanding, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. This is not what I want to do, right? And saying, how can I help you get there? And they didn't end up staying with the organization, right? Because it was truly not a good fit. But I still talk with that person to this day. I still talk with that person and talk to them about their career, right? Where they are, where do they want to go, what's next for them, right? I still do because I cared about that person and
The
what
whole person,
the whole person, exactly.
not just what you contribute to here at work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's the big part. So you all probably hear us talking about boot camp and catalyst, but that's exactly why we did this because we get so focused on HACCP supplier, food defense. But you as an individual leader, whether you have direct reports or not, make the difference. There are micro cultures within all different companies and their culture and hierarchy. And you still make a difference in the space that you are in.
You do.
And your team members do as well. So when we think about leadership development, it's not just about, it's not just about, giving skills to someone and thinking they don't make a difference. These are the things that are the human skills that connect.
Absolutely. And you really do have the power to impact your area, your micro culture. You have the power to create that, right? Create whatever culture you want. And then the biggest, like I would say the icing on top, right? The cherry, right? Is that people see that. And the biggest inspiration is when people see you hitting your goals that they've been struggling to do because they're using this old method that everyone's trying to use, but it's still not working for them, right? But we keep using the same tools over and over. But once they see you doing things differently, people are going to say, wow, like you're starting to meet your goals. How are you doing it? Oh, can I do a little bit of that? Right? Like,
yeah. So maybe it's not top down, bottom up. Maybe it's like having the light from everybody be able to shine. That's the goal.
Well, it's one of the reasons why we talk about being a spark, right? Like this, obviously, catalyst is our brains, right? And how we think. But it's one of the reasons why we talk about being that spark, like a catalyst, right? Like jump starting you and it's because each of you can be that spark in your organization. And then we all know that one spark can transform an organization. And imagine if you have 6 sparks around, right? Or 10 sparks, right? Like Abby thinking about the 30 employee organization. Imagine if there was just these little sparks happening in the organization. It's going to catch on, whether the CEO is a spark or not. The CEO is going to be like, wow, like, oh, this plant has never met this goal before, but now they are. What's happening down there? How is this person leading differently? I want more of that because I want the organization to be successful. That's how that leadership, right? Those leadership skills can continue to influence the organization, and that leadership presence, right, that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think as we kind of wrap up, because we have only a couple minutes left. I think whether it's top down, bottom up, middle, or something in between, it's about how maintaining as much communication and transparency as possible.
Yeah.
Understanding how we engage people, hearing voices, really helping people's lights shine and recognizing their gifts. And anybody can do that at any place in the organization.
Absolutely. You really do have everything that you need to lead.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're thinking, maybe I don't, you've heard us talk about boot camp. And our next cohort starts September 12th.
Yes.
So if you are at the spot where you're like, I am ready to dive in more and I am ready to do it a little bit different, join us.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you.
Because this is what we have in mind, right? As we think about driving food safety culture, these human skills, right? Like these leadership skills, they're needed and you have to have them. And as you grow, you have to continue to develop them. One reason why we developed our leadership program into this progressive curriculum is because as we grow, as our circle of influence grows, as our job change, right, in our areas of the community change, on what we have ownership, you need different skills, right? Absolutely. You need to continue to build on those.
Absolutely. So, next week we will be back, same time, same place, but we're going to have a special guest from someone not from the food industry. And so I'm super excited to have Nikki Vo join us because she's going to talk about leadership and development and innovation and a whole bunch of other things that all are similar because we've got them here, but yet we get a new perspective on it.
Absolutely. So super excited about that and for you to think about how that incorporates into your role and you as a leader.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us either today live or on our replay. We appreciate having you be here as part of the Catalyst community.
Absolutely. And we will see you next week.
Yes, we will. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.